On video 2, we're going to go over the models and units, and with that we'll be going over bases and the difference with multi-part models, model arcs, the ranks and then type of formations you can have, unit boundaries and their spacing, and then drawing line of sight. Now before I get into the video, I want to give a couple of thank yous. First, this is a huge project, and even though I know most of the rules, sometimes I get things wrong or they don't come away the way I meant them to on the video. There's over 20 of the 9th Age leaders that are helping me proofread these videos to ensure what ends up on the videos is correct and makes sense for everybody. It's a lot of work going through this, editing and making sure everything's right, and I appreciate all of their help and input into getting this to where it's a great Learn to Play series. Also, I want to give a huge thank you to Gabe with Gabe of Thorn Studios for letting me use his Ogre Khans, Kingdom of Equitaine, and Warriors of the Dark Gods models for some of these videos. You'll definitely notice those when they're on the table because he has beautiful miniatures. He does a great job of painting, and I thank him so much for letting us use those and show you guys how to play 9th Age with some of his models. All right, so now we're going to talk about some models and some units for 9th Age. So first we use a 28 mil scale. So for example, this guy right here is going to be 28 mil. Each of the little guys below and then him would be on the 28 mil size. Now the others are still based on 28 mil, but they're a lot bigger. So when we start talking about ogres or cavalry or large cavalry, when we get over to monsters, all of those are still based off the 28 mil scale. They're just going to be larger models in that scale. Now, if you do go anywhere from the 25 to really the 32 mil, they should look roughly about the right size when you're buying models. And one of the great things about 9th Age being a community-based project is you're not stuck with one model company. You can go with really any model company you want, any type of model, and there's not one specific model that has to work for any of the units. Now, one thing I do want to point out is every miniature that's on the same base is going to be considered the same model. So for example, this big monster or this rider, they're all going to be the same model, but they're going to have some different parts on how they act differently on the model. All right, so the next thing I want to go over is going to be the bases. So all models are placed on either the rectangular base, which would be something like this, or something like this, or we're going to have round War Machine bases, which I'm going to get into in just a second. Now with all of the rectangular bases, you're going to have two different measurements. You're going to have your front and your side. So for example, this would be like a 40 by a 40, or this cavalry model would be a 25 going this way, and going deep is going to be a 50. For the big cavalry model, we would be looking at 50 by 100. And over here on the Great Big Spider, we're going to be at 100 by 150. Now, I don't know why we do the bases in millimeter and then we do all the other measurements in like the US with inches. So it is going to be a little bit of mix from one measurement style to the other. And when we were talking about multi-part models before, so for example, this big spider monster, this could be a spider monster with just the guys on top that he normally comes with, or he could have a Lord level character on him as well. And what you're going to see is those models are going to have different offensive profiles, and then each one of those would hit differently with different weapons. And then you're going to have the mount, which is going to be its own profile. Now sometimes the models are going to have multiple parts that are going to be the same. So example, for these chariots, we're going to have a couple of charioteers on each one of those. So those will be out where it'll say charioteer and then it might say a 2 or a 3 behind it. And you might see something like the Anvil of Power, where it's going to say Anvil Guards, but then it's just going to say Attack 3. So that's representing that 3 guys would be attacking. And when that's the case, you're always going to have 3 attacks as long as that model's still alive. All right, so here's an example of round bases with War Machines. So for example, this is just a diorama that Karen uses. So what would really matter is not the men or the diorama, but actually the base size. So if we did this, this is a 60 mil base, and when you have a round base, they're only going to use one number, so it'd just be the 60 mil, not the 60 by 60, like we do with the square bases. And then the other thing is you're going to have 360 line of sight. For example, this one's going to be a larger base size, so this can be a 75 mil base for the goblins. And again, any of the guys that are around here are not going to be part of the actual play, so it wouldn't matter if the guy was here or here. If there are no guys, you still would be treating this as the base size when it comes to the rules of the game. So I'm going to bring our chariots back and talk about a couple other things. So first, when you have a multi-part model, if anything affects it, say example a spell, it's going to affect the entire model unless it specifically says otherwise. Like they may say it doesn't affect harnessed, which would mean any of the horses you would not be affected, but then the riders would be affected. So I'm going to use the Gargantula model to show you unit facings. Any unit, whether it's a single model or a ranked up unit of infantry, is always going to have 4 facings. They're going to have their front facing, which would be here, both of their flanks on either side, and then you're going to have a rear facing back here. And the easiest way to see how those work is if we go ahead and put a line of sight marker up, everything along this line, so when I go ahead and take the laser and I put this here, that's going to show you that everything going this way is going to be in the front, and everything from the laser when I move it this way is going to be in the flank. You can even do it this way as well if you want to put it on this side. That'll again show you the front and the flank. And back here, we can just put it back here, and you can also get what would be the rear if we go this way, or the flank if we come this way with it. So next, let's talk about ranking up in units. So if you have a unit that is going to be standard size, which is going to be these guys right here. So normally you're going to see those on the 20 mil and the 25 mil bases. You need at least 5 files to make a rank, and that would be ranks going back this way. Now these guys have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, so they definitely have enough. They could even be one less and be a little bit farther back, and they could have ranks. So right now they have 1, 2, 3, 4, they have 5 ranks, and they're going to have 6 files on this particular unit. Now to count as a rank for anything that's going to be large, like these chariots, you only need 3. So they actually have 1 additional chariot. So even if 1 chariot was killed, they would still have a full rank. And then anytime you get to the big monsters, all the monsters need to have is just 1 to count as a rank for them. So the next thing I want to talk about is going to be close formation versus line formation. So with close formation, that's going to say how you're going to see most units, and that's going to be less than 8 files. So for example, these skeletons, these dwarfs are all going to be in close formation, which is your typical battle formation. And even when we look at these guys here, the Caimans, they're also going to be in close formation, but they get ranks because they're 3 wide and they're going to be large models. Now when we start looking at line formation, we're going to see that a lot with shooters. So these handgunners are going to be in line formation because they have at least 8 files, as well as these bowmen. And what you're going to typically find is elite models that are going to put a lot of damage output are going to like line formation because they get to attack an extra rank. And we're going to see the shooters in a line formation because they're going to get more shots, and sometimes they'll even get an extra rank, depends on what type of weapon they're going to be firing. Now when we start talking about rank and file, you're going to hear that a lot, and everything is rank and file except for characters. All of these in here are just your regular rank and file, and back here you'll see, I'm going to bring this a little closer, most of these are rank and file, but you're going to see here's a character, and here's a character. So those would not be considered rank and file. The other thing is when we talk about health pools, so health pools are going to be unit wide. So if we start losing models here, it's real easy because they have 1 wound. We're just going to start taking models off as we lose health point. Now if there's a champion, you do keep that separate because champions would have their own health pool. And so for example, some champions are going to have more than 1 health point. So like right here, this would be our champion for this guy, and he's going to have an extra, well, he's going to have the same amount of wounds, but he would need to count his wounds separately from the other unit. So when this unit would take a wound, what we're going to do is we're going to put 1 health point marker on the unit to say that they've already lost 1 health point. Then when they would take their second wound, we're going to mark that they've lost 2 health points on there. And then since they're 3 health point models, what would happen is when they take their third wound, instead of putting a 3 on here for 3 health points, what we're going to do is we're just going to remove one of the models. So we would take that away, and then this model is dead. Now if we put him back, the one thing I do want to say is if you have champions in multi-health point models, then you have to keep them separate. So for example, if they were in combat and the champion was targeted, or maybe there was a spell that specifically targeted the champion, and he took 2 wounds, then we're going to mark this as 2 health points on the champion, and say that spell also did 2 wounds to the unit. At that point, then we would need to mark that for 2 wounds on the unit, and then let's say that they go ahead and get that 3rd wound from somewhere else. We would end up taking this model off as being dead because he's lost his 3 health points and the champion still has the 2. So you can't spread out any of the wounds through health points throughout the entire unit. Once you've reached where one model can be removed, you'll always just take him off, unless it's a champion or somebody that counts its own health points on there. So the next thing we want to go over is going to be your boundary for the unit. So with a unit, if you have a full unit like this, then it's easy. The entire edge is the boundary. Now, I typically play that my movement tray is not going to count for my boundary, and everybody does a little bit different, but most of the time I have bigger movement trays, so I play that you do have to get to my actual model edge. However, if you start losing models, so for example, we've lost these 2 models, my boundary on this is still where the missing models would be, because as long as I have guys in the back rank, we're going to count this whole rank as being the boundary. Same way over here. This Cayman is missing, but the unit boundary is still there just as though he was there, and same way with these archers back here. Now when you're trying to figure the center of the unit, all you're going to do is just go corner to corner, and so if we go here, center, and here center, that'll show you right here's where the center is. It doesn't matter that the models are missing, it's still going to be the center right here. And same thing here on the Caymans. If I go like this and like this, that's going to show me my center, which is going to be right here. And because he's missing, it will make no difference on my center. All units are going to have 4 facings, so they're going to have their front facing, both of their flanks, and their rear face. And when we look at these, it's really easy if you get any of the line of sight arcs, because once you do this from the unit, you can tell exactly where each one of these are going to be when we move this around. So I'm going to show you some practical applications of how to figure out what flank we're looking at for certain things. These Caymans are in big trouble. They're surrounded by dwarfs on every side. And to show you, so when I bring my line of sight marker here, and if I bring it right to the edge of this Cayman, and I run my laser, for this unit we can see that they are definitely in the front, and this unit, even without this line of arc, it's pretty easy to see that they're going to be in the front. And when we come over here on this Grudge Buster, we said it, we don't even have to look, we know that's going to be in the flank. So when we come look at the organ gun and we line this up, what we're going to see is there's more on this side of the organ gun than this side of the organ gun, which means the organ gun is also in this unit's flank. And if we want to look at the back, and if we go here and we do this line of sight, we're going to see that more of the unit is in the rear than in the flank. So this unit is going to be in the rear of the Caymans. Next, I want to talk about base contact. So a unit is in base contact if the unit is in contact with another unit. That does work even corner to corner. So when you see this here, these 2 guys are in base contact with this Cayman. And over here, you'll see that these guys here are all in contact, because what we're going to do is we're going to go corner to corner on both sides, and we're going to go everything in between. So you're going to have 6 dwarfs on this side in base contact, and if there is a missing model, we were still going to go over the gap and we'll pretend that these guys are in base contact with him. The same thing with his Grudge Buster. Since he was engaged, the Grudge Buster was able to come back here, and he's able to come back and fight over this gap, so he would be engaged with him. Another thing I want to point out though is it will matter for your character. So for example, if we're looking here, this character's in base contact. This character is just barely in corner to corner with that one there. And now if these had just charged in, the characters could make way, but you do want to make sure that when you're lining up that if you want your characters to fight, that you're in base contact. Or it may be that you didn't want this character to fight, so when you lined up, you would have scooted over like this, and then this character would have been in contact instead of this character. Because again, we're going corner to corner with everything. Now you can also have things where you can be partially or fully inside of an object. So for example, we have a forest here, and right now these knights are fully within the forest. However, if they came out here and they were like this, then they wouldn't be completely in there, so we would call that a partially within the forest. It's a little trickier when you're trying to figure out how to line them to a round base. So what I'm going to do is move this guy off the top so you can see where the round base is. And what you end up doing is, if the model is where you can be in a line basically to the corner of it or all the way over, then you're in base contact. So this model, and this model, all three of these are definitely touching the base if you draw a straight line to it. And then each one of these on the outside would be what we would call the corner to corner as before. So in this case, you are going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 models that are able to be base to base with this War Machine, and that's going to be 10 when you figure the back rank as well. If you had wider models, so you had 25 mil models, then you wouldn't get as many in there because you wouldn't have the corner to corner on both sides. So next I want to talk about distances. So the first thing I want to let you know is you can always measure distances at any time, whether it's your models, your opponent's models, how far you are between objectives, anything you need to, you can measure, which is always great because you should be measuring everything out and really trying to figure out how far is this charge going to be, can I shoot, do my spells work within this, and the more that you get used to knowing what your models do, the more you'll want to really make sure that you have your distances correct. Now when we're measuring distances between units, we're always going to use the closest measurement. So you can see that these guys are angled a little bit here and these guys are angled here. So we wouldn't go the farthest, we'd actually go the closest. So this is going to be just a little over 8 inches, which means for charge purposes, this would be a 9-inch charge. If they had something that was an 8-inch ability, again, if it's over 8, then it wouldn't count, because once you go even, a 1/4 inch over 8, now you're basically going to be at the 9 inches. Now something that seems a little unique, but if I put this here, so now we have a building in the way. Even if you're measuring and there's something in the way, you still measure from the closest to closest. So we wouldn't come over here and go, oh, this is 11 inches. We would actually pretend that the building wasn't here when we set this back, and then we would go the 8.5, which basically ends up being the 9 inches. Now you would think this wouldn't matter at all, but sometimes it's going to matter for spells or shooting. In the case of these guys, surprisingly, they can actually go through a building because of the way that they move. So as long as they could see these guys, then they would be able to charge, and this would be an auto charge because of their movement. All right, so let's talk about some line of sight. We're going to start out with the dwarf crossbowmen and what they can see. So the first thing, if we're looking at this unit of cavalry, the dwarf crossbowmen, if you take a look at the line of sight and we put the laser up, at first glance it does not look like the dwarves can see the cavalry because the laser doesn't clip that last guy. Now, if you remember before, we had unit boundaries, and everything in basically that boundary, whether the model is there or not, is going to be considered part of the boundary. And what we're going to find out is with these dwarfs, if we move this guy over and we take a look, they can see this unit because of the unit boundary. So no matter where this model is, those dwarfs are still going to be able to see this unit, and that would be for things like charging or even casting spells. Now it does get a little complicated because you have to be able to see a model to shoot it. So even though they could see this unit of cavalry if they wanted to charge them, right now the way we have this guy over here on this side, none of the models can see him, and which means it's a little more restrictive when you're shooting, which means they couldn't actually shoot him. However, if we moved him over here, what you would see then is this first dwarf can see him, and if we move this over one more, the second dwarf line can see. And let's go to the third one and take a look. And so the third one's out. So for purposes of shooting, only 2 of the dwarfs, which actually would be 4 because you get the front and the rear rank. So 4 dwarfs could be able to shoot the unit if he was where he's at now. However, if he was where he started over here, none of them would be able to shoot him just because they wouldn't be able to see a model. Now when we're looking at the dwarfs to the light cavalry over here, the dwarves can see the light cavalry, and they can see them because the building is not completely blocking. However, buildings do block the line of sight, so no matter how high you are, even if you're on a hill, you can't see over a building. So over here, none of the dwarves can see anything on this side. However, when we get over here, if we take a look, and I play basically the very edge of the building. Everybody may play a little different, but what I can see is to right here, this dwarf and over can see the cavalry, which means for shooting purposes, all of these dwarves would be able to shoot the cavalry, and then the dwarves over here would not be able to because they can't see. But as a unit, they could see them. Now, let's say that I change this out and I put another unit of dwarves in front of these guys. If we have a standard size, and standard size model, then you cannot see through standard size to see additional standard size. Typically, these dwarves would not be able to see these cavalry because they're all standard size. Now, cavalry do get what we call tall, which allows them to see over standard size. Basically, whatever their size is, you can see above that. And because these guys are tall, then these dwarves can see the cavalry, whereas in most parts they wouldn't if they were the same size. So for example, in this situation, I changed out the cavalry for standard size infantry models. And again, because this is standard, these are standard, and these guys are standard, then these cannot see these because the building's blocking here, and then the rest of the unit is blocking everything for them there. So next I want to talk about unit spacing. So there's several rules with unit spacing that you just want to know ahead of time. First, no unit can be within less than an inch of any of the friendly or enemy units or in between impassable terrain and the unit. These are really handy, and I just bumped those, but you'll see these have the half-inch, inch, and 2-inch markers on it. So it's really nice just to be able to put these down here and go, yes, I'm within an inch. Over here, same thing, I'm within an inch. If you're moving, then you can get within a half-inch. So for example, if these guys were back here and they wanted to move past these guys, they could get within a half-inch as long as they stay more than an inch when they get past them completely. So if they came up here, they would just need to make sure to get the full inch away from this unit, which they are right now, and they would be fine. Same way with enemy. This eagle is an enemy unit, so they would have to stay an inch away from the eagle, which they are. And you can see here, this would be the half-inch mark. So if they were moving past the eagle, they could get within a half-inch, but then if they did that, they would have to get farther than an inch away. Now what you'll notice in this situation is they now got too close to the impassable because they're less than a half-inch away and they need to be an inch away. So they would have had to do some pretty creative wheeling, or they probably couldn't have actually got from here to there the way that the building and the eagle and this unit is placed. Now that would change if they're charging, because if you're charging, then you can go right past them as long as you don't actually make contact with this unit or this unit. If they're charging that one, you can go past them and you don't have to keep the half-inch spacing, and you can get right next to the building too. So they could come straight up here and they could basically be in contact, all but in contact with the impassable or building, and they didn't care if they stayed, if they got right next to these guys or these guys. The next thing is once you're within the half-inch or an inch, because you charged, you can keep that spacing until you move outside of it again. So let's say, for example, that these guys killed all of these, which again, that would be pretty unlikely, but if that happened, then they're free to move how they want to. So if they want to go forward or wheel, or if they want to do any moving, until they've gotten an inch away from the building. Once they've gotten an inch away from the building, then they cannot move within an inch of it and in their movement, or within a half-inch of it while they're actually moving past it. And just to bring this back, I want to show you one more principle. The same thing would be the case as, say they charged right past this eagle here. This unit ended up being killed again. Again, unprobable, but if it did happen, now it would be the same thing with the eagle. As long as they're within the half-inch or inch of this, then they can do any moves they want to, but once they've left that mark and they're more than an inch away, now they cannot get within an inch of the eagle when they end their movement, or within a half-inch if they're actually moving. And then the last thing I want to talk about is the only way that a unit can actually become base contact with another unit is by charging them. So before the movement phase, we have a charge phase, and we'll get to that in just a little bit. But when we say charge, this would be the only way that I could come in and actually get in contact and then fight these guys. Otherwise, I'm going to be staying an inch apart of all the units when I'm done with my movement, unless I've actually charged somebody. Join us in the next video where we go over the characteristics and how some of the basic model interactions work. Hi YouTube, this is Mike with Dark Wizard Gaming. Thanks so much for watching our How to Play 9th Age video series. Now if you did like the video, please use the like and subscribe feature below here and feel free to leave any comments. And now if you have questions about how the game works or any rules questions, I would strongly suggest you go to the 9th Age forum and actually post on there. They're going to have a full team and there's a community there to help you with any rules questions. If you do comment here, I will answer your questions, but it may take a week or two before I get back with you, whereas if you go to the 9th Age forums, you'll get answers right away. So enjoy your 9th Age gaming. Thanks.